Hey friends, this is Mark Suroviec, host of the Workplace Solutions podcast, inviting you to discover the joy of work. All right, Jim, you ready for part two?
I'm ready for part two.
Man, it's been ages since I've seen you.
It has. I grew a beard. You shaved yours off. I've had a chance to redo my wardrobe. We moved houses. It's been great, but I'm glad to see you again.
Speaking of the beard, I have not shaved my beard, but my wife has seen me exactly one time. It will be 12 years this May, and she's seen me exactly one time without a beard. Mm-hmm. I shaved when we went to Hawaii and went snorkeling.
Oh.
And beards and snorkel masks just don't play well together.
Okay. Yeah,
and her first reaction to seeing my face without a beard was, I don't like it.
Yeah.
I mean, she literally said, I was like, you mean my face? You don't like my face? She's like, no, grow the beard back. I'm like,
grow the beard back now.
Okay,
yes.
Now I know.
Yeah.
So I will never take a job that forces me to shave my beard because my marriage is more important.
That's right. My marriage is more important. And the funny thing is that as human beings, what we assign as a component of another person might have nothing to do with how they were born, right? Mm-hmm. So you choose to grow in your facial hair. I assign it to you as a feature, right? You wear glasses and you have a beard. So if you suddenly showed up without glasses and a beard, and I have no experience with that, it's going to be unsettling. And people make fun of the comic book Superman or the TV show or the movies, etc. But they make fun of the fact that you can't tell Superman and Clark Kent, even though they look so close together. And yet, when somebody takes their glasses off and shaves their beard and you don't recognize who they are, or you're very unsettled by it and you don't think they look like them anymore, that's why, right?
Yeah, I used to think that was so ridiculous, and then my wife gets that all the time because when she was at work, she is a professor and administrator at a university, and she is in her business attire, and then if she's wearing a t-shirt and jeans at church, like folks don't even recognize she's the same person.
Yeah.
And they'll walk right by her. It's your outfit, it's not you.
And she had glasses on when I first met her, and then the next time I saw her, she didn't, and I was like, who is this? Oh, yes, right.
In my sophomore year of college, I know we're telling a story before we do an icebreaker, that's fine. My sophomore year of college, I decided to bleach blonde my hair like Eminem. Like it was like buzz cut, bleach blonde, and I grew a goatee because prior to that I was clean shaven, grew a goatee, and had Eminem hair.
The real Slim Shady.
Yeah,
wow.
Like I wore giant corduroy pants and stuff. I'm dating myself.
Yeah.
But I remember walking past my roommate the first time back from summer vacation, and he walked right by me. I was like, Maddie, what are you doing? And he couldn't believe I was the same person.
Yeah.
You know, I went through that skater punk phase. That's fine.
Yeah.
I just remember seeing him in the hallway like, dude.
That's great. And I have so many, as friends, I have so many questions to ask you in the future where I'll ask you those stories from that time. But for the podcast, I will refrain.
All right, let's do a new icebreaker question here. Number 22, a story or worst roommate story.
This particular story is what I was willing to do to get away from a roommate. My very first day of college, freshman year, my parents drop me off. I go in, find my room. I meet my roommate. He is absolutely the most myopic, the most, myopic is the way to say it. He only had one element to his personality, and that was to watch Beavis and Butthead on the television and quote Beavis and Butthead in conversation. And I talked to him that day. I talked to him the next day, and he had nothing to offer me except, do you want to watch Beavis and Butthead? And some sort of Beavis and Butthead response to whatever it was that I talked to him. So it was a bad roommate situation, but it was also subterranean. There were no windows. This was I was in the lowest level, the basement level of this dormitory, and so we have no light. And I think I'm going to lose my mind. This roommate, I decided I was going to get away from them, and I started brainstorming with my friends. How can I get away? They said, "Well, see if you can get transferred." Tried it, couldn't get transferred. Very, very long story short was I discovered that there was an honors dorm. And I discovered that if you could get into the honors dorm by being in the honors program that you could get out of the regular dorm and go into this very nice honors dorm. So I said to the professor, I would like to get into the honors dorm, which is not the conversation he thought he was having with me. He was thinking we were going to immediately start with, how do I get into the honors program? So I said, I'd like to get into the honors dorm. And he said, okay. And I said, and if I'm in the honors program, then I can live in the honors dorm, right? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I'd like to be in the honors program. And he said, huh. And I could tell that he was trying to question what, I don't think I should really just put you in the honors program because you want to get into the honors dorm. But I could see him processing, and he didn't really have any good reason, I guess, not to. So he said, to get into the honors program, you take an honors class. I said, great, sign me up for an honors class. So I signed up for an honors class. That put me in the honors program. And I got to move into the honors dorm where I met all of my lifelong friends that I still check in on every once in a while. It was all because of that particular roommate that I joined the honors program at school and got into the honors dorm.
I love that. How'd you do in the honors class?
I got an A.
Well, fantastic. So
that's a whole nother story.
You deserve to be there.
Yes. Probably not, but yes. Yes, I will accept it.
Since we're talking about roommates, I'm thinking of that same roommate, and he really was a good roommate. The time when he was at the worst was... I deserved it. And I'm not going to get into the details of this. We had locked him inside the room. So there's a thing called a penny lock. I'm not going to describe it, but we penny locked him in the room with two other friends of ours who were pretty obnoxious. And he got so mad that he was stuck in the room with them for hours that he decided to get me back. And so he put Tiger Balm, icy hot, in my drawers. In the pair of underwear at the very bottom of the stack. So there was a day I was getting ready for track practice, and all of a sudden I was like, oh no. and he's over there like he had forgotten about it.
Yeah.
He's like, oh yeah, I did that to you.
He made the long play, the long con. He forgot about his own con.
It was I was speaking in a very high pitch until I was able to get the. Man! Oh, it was hot.
Wow!
But he thought it was hilarious, and I deserved it because I did. But it still sucked.
Wow! What a great surprise! It's kind of like leaving $10 in a pocket of a winter jacket and then finding it a year later. It's like, oh, right, I did put icy hot. I am a genius. I did put icy hot in your underwear. Fantastic.
Oh, man. I could do an entire episode about college pranks, but that's not what we're talking about today.
Separate podcast.
Separate podcast. I am here with Jim Karwisch, a.k.a. Jim Prov. I don't know how many people actually call him that, but I do. And he is a professional coach with Untangled Narrative. And Jim, we are talking about getting untangled. So can you real quick just review those three types of narrative we discussed in the last episode?
Sure. So the things that we're generally dealing with, and again, I want to preface this by saying this is not some sort of psychological knowledge. It's not from studying and becoming a therapist. This is just my breakdown so that I can work with people focusing on their narrative. So I broke it down into your inner narrative, your social narrative, and your value narrative. And so your inner narrative, I say, I throw into that bucket anything where you are talking to yourself about yourself. So if you believe something about yourself and you tell yourself a story about it and you perpetuate that thought long enough until it becomes deeply held and it's wrapped up with examples in a story form, then it's an inner narrative. Right. And so inner narratives can be very healthy, but they can also be kind of unhealthy or tangled, and they can, make you a little bit too egotistical. They could make you a little bit too self-conscious. They could make you a little bit too timid to try for something that you would really like to try for. So that's the inner narrative. The social narrative, I contribute to that by talking to you about myself. You contribute, and everybody else does, by talking about me. And together, those stories work themselves out into different people's minds as their own narrative. And so if you know me from church or if you know me from work, you might have a different narrative. You might have different experiences. You might have different stories. You might have talked to me in a different frame. You might think of me differently. And so all of those social narratives could be different from one another. And then the last section is the value narrative. And that's where my value or the value of something that I've created is being told a story about, right? So I'm talking to you about either my value, which is different than just talking to you socially. I'm talking to you about why I'm valuable or why I have something to offer. And so that could be in a job interview, that could be in a pitch, right? All sorts of different, it could be talking about somebody why they should marry you, right? Or why they should go into business with you or whatever it is. So the value narrative and the social narrative are both external, and then the inner narrative generally is a combination of things that have built up over your entire life. And many people might have contributed to that inner narrative. You might have, but also your teachers when you were young, and your parents, and close friends from childhood, or brothers and sisters, cousins. So all of those stories together form these narratives. And then when they start to conflict with one another and you can't move forward towards something that you are being offered or that you want to pursue, and it's not because you don't have the money, or it's not that you don't have the time or the tools. It's that you just can't move forward. You don't have a belief in yourself. You don't have confidence. Your narrative is getting in the way. Then untangling that narrative is the next step toward pursuing whatever it is that you want to pursue.
And to clarify, I'm thinking about that social narrative. So is it what they believe about you or what you think they believe about you? Or is that part of the conversation?
That's part of the conversation, right? If I started to try and tell you, Mark, in real life, what you think about me, I would likely be wrong. I would have put together how does he know me, and when have we been around each other, and how does he act toward me? And I would have all of these components that aren't really great facts that I use to build this narrative. And so if I said the social narrative that Mark would have towards me is that it's this. So you knew me when I did improv, and so you probably see me as somebody who's fun. But if I tried to detail out what your narrative would be for me, I might be very wrong. There might be elements of it where you would say, like, that's not what I think of you. I don't know. I don't hold that belief about you. And so sometimes the untangling of the social narrative is admitting that you don't really know, and that you're putting pieces together from the experiences that you've got, just like they are putting together their real narrative for you based on the experiences.
I mentioned this in the previous episode that Jim is also my professional coach. So I remember a conversation we had where we were digging through that social narrative, and you made the comment, something to the effect of the absence of communication could mean a bunch of different things. And I had interpreted that in a very specific way. This person doesn't care because they didn't say anything after I shared something that was important to me.
That's right.
And you're like, well, maybe they didn't know what to say. Maybe they didn't know how to respond. Maybe they got lost in their email. Who knows? But I was applying a very specific, that was another step in the conversation of this person doesn't care, but absence of response does not equal absence of care. I might still be right, but it's not a done deal. It's not for sure. So
and that goes into the category of interpreting silence, and we do
that's what it was.
We do it all the time. We do it when we send a text to somebody. Now people expect the other person to text back within seconds. Why did you not text me back? I texted you 3 days ago, right? And people who are very good at crafting narratives, some people think that way a lot. Some people think about it just a little bit. Some people don't even give it a second thought. They don't get a text back. They just kind of write it off. But other people will continue to pour into that narrative. Now it's day 3 and they still haven't texted me back. That must mean, and they continue to build that narrative. So by the time the person actually gives input again, you find out that the relationship is basically written off by the person who has been sitting in silence, while the other person has no idea that's going on. So when it comes to silence or a lack of data, anytime that we start to build a narrative, if we can just recognize that we're doing it, right? In the absence of this other person, I am assuming their absence means something that they have not told me outright that it means. So I'm not writing you back after a couple of days, and I tell you I didn't actually receive the text message. And we go back and look in the text messages, and it never arrived for me. So for whatever reason, right? Or I went through a bad period of time where something bad happened to me, and I wasn't responding to anybody for a few days. But now that I am feeling better, you're the first person I want to talk to. You're my best friend, right? So what are the circumstances of that person not replying back? What's the amount of time that they believe is appropriate for a response? If they say only 3 words back as a response to an email that you spent 3 hours writing to them, and you write 6 paragraphs and they write back 2 words, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not worth 6 paragraphs. But we think that it does because we compare our experience with their experience, and we say, oh, well, if they really cared about me, they would have written more words. I certainly deserve more, or they didn't write me back for 2 days, and that means that they don't really care.
As a side note, if you are spending 3 hours to craft the perfect email is probably not the right way to communicate the message that you are about to send.
Yeah, and we fear communication sometimes, and so that can be a narrative that needs to be untangled with a particular person. If you find yourself afraid to call the person, you'd be afraid to meet them in person. The only thing you feel comfortable doing is sending something just in text, and it takes you 3 hours to write the text, and you're still having trouble hitting send because you're so worried about it. Chances are you've got something tangled up in there in your head about this situation that likely could get untangled, and you could have an easier time with this. And so either you're right and that person doesn't need to be dealt with anymore, and they're not a good person for you and they don't need to be in your life, or you're very wrong about them and you've built up this narrative that is unhealthy and is not giving them a fair shot at giving you a good response when you call them.
Going back to that interpreting of silence idea, does whether you're naturally an optimist or a pessimist affect that? Do you see folks who, if they're naturally optimistic, they're like, oh yeah, well, I'm interpreting the silence as giving them the benefit of the doubt, and vice versa? Or is it more situational based on who they're interacting with?
I think certainly optimism and pessimism are a component to every narrative. And I think that they are launch pads for a narrative. I think that we can have some pretty solid experiences with another person that we concrete in our minds as something that's very, very important. And we can have other experiences with them that are not so important. Those are looser or experiences that you can kind of wave away. And so if you've got a fundamental core memory with that person, and it's that you really, really value that person, you admire them so much, they're such a great person, then everything from that point forward is going to be held up against the narrative that you've started. And so if you're a pessimistic person, but you really admire another person, you might very well think positive things about them. So I'd say pessimism, optimism are a factor, but so is the experiences that you've had and how you rank those experiences, how much you hold on to those experiences. So whatever it was that I did with the person that I told the story about earlier on, whatever it was that I did that made them not like me, I'll probably never know. I'll probably never be able to get back to that. But whatever it was, they changed their mind at a later date. And that means that either they felt like they were wrong about it, or I did something that outweighed what they were thinking about before, or I just completely misinterpreted the human being to think that they didn't like me when the truth was that maybe they hated their job. I mean, anything could have been going on.
A lot of the examples you're using make me think of the fundamental attribution error. Is that something that comes up?
Sure.
Can you define that for folks?
In social psychology, the fundamental attribution error, also known as correspondence bias or attribution effect, is the tendency for people to underemphasize situational and environmental explanations for an individual's observed behavior while overemphasizing dispositional and personality-based explanations. So that's the Wikipedia entry for it. So that's exactly the science behind how we would start looking at it. We would look at biases. We would look at, do you have a natural tendency when you might not find yourself to be racist as a human? I'm not talking to Mark specifically, but there might be a person who considers himself not to be a racist, but when they are around people of color, they behave in a certain way. And when confronted with how they feel and what stories they tell themselves in their subconscious or even in their conscious mind about the person when they're around them, they can find that, okay, I hold a difference in my mind about whether I'm racist or whether I've had experiences with people of color, and they change my view of other people of color. Well, what's the definition of racism? And we could go deep down into that and what's actually happening. But the truth of it is that what is it that you are using to make your decisions? You are making your next decision about whether or not you're going to work with this person or spend time with them or trust them or take legal advice from them or whatever it is. And if the color of their skin is influencing that, whether you call that racism or not, you should pay attention to it, because you might be leaving behind good advice for not a good reason. So when we break it down, we don't look at good or bad. Generally, we look at, is this effective? Is this something that's supporting the healthy version of you that you want to be? And often the healthiest narrative, it can't be brought down to facts, because all of it's narrative, right? All of it is experiences. Nobody's going around and taking detailed factual notes about all these things that have happened. We're all experiencing them differently. And so if we tried to say tit for tat, you did this, I did that, and that's how we tried to solve all of this, we would find that we don't agree about even what happened in the instance. So far better to look at the narrative that we've created and take, I overemphasized this particular element, underemphasized that. In fairness to this person, they deserve equal. They deserve for me to assume goodwill, for me to assume that they're competent, assume that they are not an evil person.
We got time for a couple more questions. Who is someone that has helped you in your career? Let's thank them by name.
Okay. Well, one person that has helped me in my career is Mark Suroviec. When I moved to Rome, I didn't know very many people. And it was immediately after I met you, Mark, that you started to introduce me to other people that became key people for me to know in Rome, Georgia. And I had a lot of success at in-person coaching that I do right now by the people that I met directly because of your introductions. So I might have done some of the networking, but you did the initial introductions to people that I'd never met them before. So meeting you and you being your natural self, your natural connecting self, and the work that you did there, I very much appreciate. That's not just ingratiating because you're the host, but it is the first person I think of.
Yeah, I don't. When you say that, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I'm not asking you to do that, but I appreciate your genuineness in saying that.
Sometimes when we meet the right person in the right environment, it's the catalyst that we need. And it's not that you necessarily did things that were just so far out of your way. They were things that you would naturally do. Like, Jim, I like Jim. I think he's cool. Don't you want to take this workshop with me? Don't you want to do this? Don't you want to do that? And people did. And I moved forward. And it was a very big help to me socially within Rome, Georgia. So having those connections was very important. So as far as people that have helped me in my career, big picture, when I left the business world as a day job in 2014, I did an improv rehearsal with a group of women it was an all-female improv troupe. They asked me to come in and watch one of their rehearsals and give them notes. And as we were walking out of that rehearsal to our cars afterward, Allison Gilmore, who is now a very, very close friend of mine, said, "What do you think about this type of work?" And in that moment, I was only a couple of days from having left SunTrust, now Truist. I was only a couple of days from having left and just moving forward. She gave me 2 opportunities immediately, and then continued to fuel those opportunities over time. That moment was the catalyst that opened the door for me to be able to learn even more about facilitation, even more about coaching, even more about improv. So I very much appreciate her.
Very good. Let's spin the wheel of embarrassing moments.
Okay, I can't wait for this.
Tell us a story of professional failure where you're the one who screwed up, and then what did you learn from it?
Well, the one that comes to mind first is the absolute most embarrassing thing that has ever happened. I was doing a show in Missoula, Montana. Very small college town, but a very beautiful town in Missoula. And the children's theater's job was 2 people would go out with a set, lights, costumes, makeup, everything needed for a 60-person show.
Ooh.
They would get in a truck. They would drive out of Missoula, Montana to someplace, perhaps Texas or South Dakota or Georgia. They would drive to that place. On a Monday, they would audition the children, kindergarten through 12th grade. Every age group had some sort of a role within the show. You rehearsed with them for a week, and at the end of the week on Friday and Saturday, you performed a live 1-hour musical where the kids were the lead characters in the show.
Wow.
So I had traveled to Missoula from Atlanta, and when I got there, we started to learn the show. And so we had this rehearsal space. I was with another group, and we were all learning this same show together. And there was a guy who was supposed to be there that his only form of transportation had completely broken down hundreds of miles away from Missoula. So he was on some sort of a journey trying to get to us. So the first half of the show that we worked through, we were finished with the first half when he arrived. And so instead of going through the second half of the show, they went back through the first half of the show again. Well, in the middle of these two halves of the show, there was a scene that I never practiced ever. And it only had 3 lines in it, which is why it got missed. So I'm standing now for the first performance of this 1-hour musical in front of a full audience. It's the first time I've done this show. I'm standing on stage with this young woman who is playing a princess, and I do not know the line that I should be giving at that moment. She's a little girl who's not a trained actor. She's standing across from me and staring at me, and I don't know my line, and she doesn't even have a hint that she's supposed to, like, she's just waiting for me to say the thing I say so she can say what she says and we can go on with the show. So there are a lot of things you can do at this moment. The worst choice is to leave the little girl by herself on stage and go backstage to try to find a script to figure out what the next line of dialogue is. After I did wait what felt like an eternity, but was probably only maybe 15 or 20 seconds, I expected somebody from backstage to just say the line, like, let's alleviate this guy's agony and just tell him. Well, when I got backstage, they were dealing with an emergency where the little kindergarten characters had one of them had accidentally gotten glitter in their kindergarten eye and started to scream that they had glitter in their eye. And that caused all the other kindergartners to also believe that they had glitter in their eyes. And so there were 16 kindergartners who all believed they had glitter in their eye, all at the same time. So they had to escort them out of the theater into another space because they were all screaming about the glitter. They had to find the kid with the actual glitter in their eye because the rest didn't have glitter in their eye. So anybody of any authority was gone from backstage. Even the young assistant directors were gone. They had taken their scripts with them. There wasn't a script backstage. There weren't people backstage. I walked around. I looked around. I couldn't figure out what was going on. So I came back on stage again with no additional information, having abandoned this young girl. She's now worked it out in her mind that I don't know what I'm doing. And so she looks at me and she says, "Don't you think it's time for the festival to begin?" And I said, "Yes, it is time for the festival to begin." And when I say this line, everyone that I could not find backstage follows their cue, comes on stage, and the show proceeds as normal for the remainder of the time. This little girl who had been doing this for a week with me knew what I was supposed to say. She just didn't understand that I, the adult who's supposed to know what's going on, couldn't remember what to say because I had never actually rehearsed it before. So looking for gaps in our knowledge is the takeaway from this. Constantly seeking what you don't know. What are your assumptions? What are the things that you think you know? And look at them from all the different angles to see what are the holes in this. Because it very well might be that the thing that you invented or the thing that you have designed or the course that you are trying to teach has a missing element to it that you didn't see because you only looked at it from one side. From one perspective.
Final thoughts? What would you like to leave us with, and how can people contact you?
So the contacting is the easiest part. You can go to untanglednarrative.com and just click on the free link to schedule a discovery session. So if you think that coaching might possibly be for you, doesn't cost you a dime. You sit down with me for half an hour, 45 minutes. It can be done by Zoom or sometimes by phone. And if it turns out to be that you would like to work together, then we can talk about all the other elements of it. So I'm on TikTok as Untangled Narrative. I'm on Instagram as Untangled Narrative. And then everything else is my last name. I haven't converted everything over. So you can probably find me as Karwisch. That's how you... So
what do you want to share?
I think just final thoughts would be that whether you hire a coach for it or not, asking yourself questions about the stories that you tell yourself about yourself and that you tell yourself about the people that are around you, just taking some time to question whether you're dealing with an objective reality or whether you're dealing with something that you've just decided upon or made up about a particular person. If you're building a case against somebody without really thinking it through, you might very well be creating a tangle in your life.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. I think you gave some fantastic advice, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you again. So
absolutely.
Appreciate
Mark,
you being on the show.
I'll be here anytime.
Life is way too short for work to suck. So if you want help to build your team, train your team, or manage your team, we're here. Come see us at workplaysolutions.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.